Hello, welcome everybody. I wasn't sure if there was going to be any interest in tech hiring, so I'm glad to see a bunch of people in the room. I'm Mike Boufford, I'm the CTO of Greenhouse, and just to get started, maybe we can do a quick round of introductions, like who are you, what do you do, and we'll start with you.
All right, I'm Satwik Seshasai. I work at Compass, where I lead our growth infrastructure engineering, and before that have been at 3 different startups in the CTO role, and have been hiring and recruiting in the tech community for almost 20 years.
My name is Blaga Lund. I'm VP of Engineering at Intent. We're ultimately the data science company for travel. I have a background in building and managing high-growth teams, as well as developing scalable solutions for Fortune 500 companies. This is a panel on hiring, and that's what I spend most of my days doing, so I'm super happy to be here.
My name's Teresa, Dietrich, and albeit to what they just said, I am currently unemployed. I am taking the summer off. I was head of product design and engineering at McKinsey New Ventures, which was an in-house tech incubator within McKinsey & Company. I was not a consultant. Before that, I was CTO of Namely, WebMD before that. So been in the industry 23 years and lots of experience hiring. One of my talks I like to give is called What I've Learned from Hiring Hundreds of Engineers.
All right, cool. Maybe we'll get a couple of snippets from that talk in some of your answers. So I guess to kick off the conversation, why don't we start with what makes tech a little bit different, which is that this is a really scarce role. You know, you post a job, you don't have hundreds and hundreds of people apply automatically. So what do you guys do to differentiate yourself in the market? And what role does talent branding play in how you communicate about why somebody should join your team and not one of the others out there?
All right, should I start?
Yeah, sure.
So I think you made a couple points in the question. So one is around tech talent really being what's different about it, and then how do you differentiate as a company. So I think it's important to think about those two things together. So I think tech talent is different because unlike many other job functions, I think it's incredibly hard to really assess the quality of an engineer's work. And so if you look at engineers on paper and you see the accomplishments they've had, it's really hard to know what was the quality of what they built, what was the scale of what they built, and what was the attitude that they brought to the table. And so when you then think about branding your company and attracting the best engineers, I think it's important to think about what makes the engineers within your company special. What are the key values that you have? What are the key engineering practices that are important to you? Do you do a lot of open source contributions? Do you focus a lot on innovation? Are you focused on quality and scale? And then what that'll do is it'll attract those engineers who have those traits that are hard to identify on a resume, but that resonate with those engineers. They'll essentially self-select and come to you and really help grow the culture that you've already built.
I think that's important, and I think the alternative, while you both have to identify the qualities of who's going to be successful there, I think it's also really important to think about what is the value proposition, right? What is the value proposition for a technologist at your organization? What is the type of impact that they're going to have? What are the opportunities that they're going to have? Because you have to be able to differentiate that in that marketplace, right? To help people understand that. When I was at McKinsey, we literally wrote a playbook for our recruiters that helped them talk through the whole thing to really help give them so that everybody was talking with the same language and everything. So I think to me it's the profile of who's going to do well and be happy and succeed there, and then what is the value proposition to put out there in the market to talk to technologists about.
I think the other thing that we like to do is build the culture in the workplace where we want to be. And that comes across with anybody that you're hiring. When we build the environment where we want to wake up every day and be there every day, that makes it so critical to bringing in the right talent.
And it attracts the right talent.
Exactly.
So you actually have to be good, don't just have a talent brand.
I think some companies will sometimes put out a better brand than what they actually have, and I think that it eventually gets back. So I think you actually have to have at least on the path to the culture that you're talking about, because technologists are very to the point and very factual, and if you tell them it's going to be like this and they come in and it's nothing like that, like they're going to talk about it in the industry and in the community, and it's not going to last.
Well, the thing is that your you don't stop selling once you hire the candidate, right? You have to continuously sell them and tell them why they should be there. It's not just about getting them in the door, it's about keeping them there, and that's why culture becomes so important.
And Teresa, you talked about a playbook, but I actually think, the brand is communicated by the engineers on the team, right? So even in the interview process, your engineers, how they approach the candidates, how they talk about what excites them about the work, that's going to send the signal of what, the talent brand is. We probably have a room of a majority of recruiters here, but, not to really offend anyone, but I think what you really should be focused on is not what is our message as a company, but what are the engineers at your company communicating about your company?
And actually, that brings me to my next question. So around candidate experience, how do you prepare all of the people who are going to have touch points with candidates to send the right message about your company? Do you just tap them on the shoulder and say, find out if they can program, or like, what do you do?
It's a huge process, right? It's not just, go talk to this person, feel them out. You have to know what you're looking for, what are the values for your company, as well as the skill set, and you have to have everyone in your interview committee trained to understand that. And everybody has different perspectives and different hidden biases that they don't understand. So it's a very orchestrated process that you constantly have to improve, right?
And you need to do training, so interview training, anti-bias training, and I think you need to have, one of the feedbacks I've always gotten when I've come into organizations and they don't have an organized process, or they haven't taken, these are our 5 competencies and here's what we're looking for, and instead, you just throw 4 engineers at one engineer you're interviewing, and guess what? They ask the same questions, and guess what? The candidate goes, they don't have it together. They're not organized. I just answered the same question 4 times. So I think it's really important to be able to say, in an interview, you're focusing on problem solving, you're doing the coding review, you're talking about teamwork and collaboration, and make it really specific, because it's one of the feedback I see a lot from candidates is if they don't feel like the company is organized and thoughtful about this process, it's a turnoff.
Especially engineers, right?
Especially engineers.
And engineers are not naturally social necessarily, which is why going back to the playbook, they need to know what they should be asking, what is the purpose of that question, what is the value that comes out of it. And while we don't try to repeat questions, there should be kind of one question to gauge how is everyone's perspective coming across.
I think, so I'll kind of agree but maybe disagree a little bit with, I think you said we weren't allowed to do physical combat, but we
no physical combat.
All right. That's fine. I think training is important, but on the other hand, you've got to let people be who they are. So it's important to not show up to an engineering team and say, here are the values of our company, here are the traits that we want to do, here's your talking points, here's yours and yours. Instead, kind of flip that around and work with the engineering team to understand what are the things we as an engineering team want to communicate out, and then just help maybe refine the message, but have that message start internally. One of the other things I've learned over time is that I've early in my career would focus quite a bit on making sure that candidates had a very consistent experience. So let's make sure if Mike and I disagree about something, let's not let the candidate know about that. And I've actually come to realize that the diversity of opinions within a company, if they come across to a candidate in a very productive way, in other words, if the candidate feels that, hey, this is a company that's growing fast, and because they're growing fast, they're genuinely debating whether they go in this direction or that direction, and I'm going to meet people who have one view and the other view, but I'm also going to come away feeling like these people collaborate without ego. These people are, focused on, every individual kind of maximizing their strengths while working together. That's going to be a much more compelling and a much more genuine experience.
So I'm going to agree and I'm going to disagree with you.
Go ahead.
So I agree on the interview process. How I've done it before is actually I get the engineers, once, they help build the competency models, and then when you take and say, okay, problem solving, I actually get volunteers of team members to actually write the problems that they're going to solve and come up with it, right? So it's not like it's handed down to them top down. So I totally agree, because it needs to be authentic, right? And it needs to be something they're going to naturally say. The other thing I will say, and I know we're going to get to diversity later, is just letting people be who they are can sometimes be a dangerous thing. And so I think, we're not talking about giving people a script to read off of. We're talking about the types of language you use, or how you represent something. Doesn't mean don't be transparent and don't be authentic. But I think it's just about like some consistency in top level message, and then also just some base level, because not everybody has the same social and cultural and background and experience, and just sort of baselining it so that the candidate has a good experience.
I think that level of coaching is relevant in like interviews and in general.
Yeah.
But it's a balance, because it's a sale, right? You are trying to sell this person on your company. So while you want to be open and transparent, you have to also convince them that it's the right place, because you could be the most genuine person and very transparent, but that may not come across correctly.
And engineers aren't necessarily natural salespeople.
It's true, and so actually one thing that I know I've experienced, I'm sure you guys have in growth periods, engineers tend to get a bit fatigued, especially during like a hyper-growth period. You're hiring tons and tons of people, going to interviews. Sometimes they might have to feel like I'm not being my totally authentic self, I'm trying to sell the brand. How do you achieve buy-in among the engineering ranks and get them all on board with this idea that they should be hiring, and hiring is important?
Well, I think for us, it's very much because they'll work with that person, right? So it should be in their best interest that they hire someone that is quality, that they feel carries the right opinion, that they can collaborate with and can help them push the bounds. And I think that's the biggest sales point. You can not care and do a terrible job, but in the end, you're going to spend your day-to-day with this person. So let's figure out how to make that the best for you.
Right, you can interview or have bad coworkers, so that's your
Yeah.
I totally agree, but I also think interviews are a fantastic growth experience for engineers and a fun
Absolutely.
experience. So, I tell my engineers, look, you may feel bored, you're giving the same damn question, 5-6 times during the day, but you're not. What you're doing is you're actually working with different engineers with different backgrounds. Read the resume in advance, think about what you're going to ask that relates to that person's background. Try to stump them, have them try to stump you, and you actually will have very interesting technical conversations that will just make the whole process.
But not every engineer is going to see that as a growth experience, right? There are
That's
plenty
fair,
of
yeah.
engineers that just want to do their work.
So that's a great segue, because I've had that reaction, right? You have the like North Star, like everyone should want to and do the right thing, right? But how one of the big things I believe with technology is that which we measure, we incentivize behavior towards. Great, okay, engineers are data driven, right? So let's do a couple things. Let's put OKRs. Let's put top level OKRs for me about hiring, and then talk about how is your OKR going to feed into that? How many interviews are you going to do? How many new people are you going to help on board? Also, putting data up for everybody to see on a board in the room to show how many open headcount, how are we trending towards that, right? And then lastly, in the competency model, the last several times I've put about interviewing and what level of interviewing and what types of interview you can do as part of your progression through the competency model. Because then if they want to progress and they want to get that promotion, those are the experiences and the growth they need to have.
We very much encourage even junior engineers to join the interview process. So they're paired up with someone more experienced, and they can get more comfortable from the beginning and not just kind of
That's exactly what I did.
Of like,
yeah.
Here, do it.
And I think building on that, involving the interviewers in the full debrief process and in the overall kind of pipeline analysis is critical, because engineers, you're right, are data driven, and so they want to also know that you're not wasting their time. You're not, like, look, we've interviewed 10 people, we've hired none of them, but we've learned from that. We've done some root cause analysis and we've refined our sourcing. You want to expose all of that.
You need to do a retro.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So I guess somebody likes the general message that this conference is sending about how to hire. One other thing that we've talked actually a bunch about in this conference is how to get better hiring manager engagement and make sure hiring managers actually treat recruiting as their job. And when I talk to a bunch of other CTOs, we all get together over a dinner or something like that. It's pretty clear that people issues are the focus. Whether it's the people on the team or the people you need to hire still. So for mid-level managers or directors on the team who are somewhere between engineer and head of the department, what do you do to make sure that they know it's part of their job? Do you set goals for them? You say hire X number of people. How do you communicate that it's important?
I think first and foremost is when they take the job, you have to make that clear. Right? You have to give them the correct expectation that this is part of your role, and it may not be your favorite thing, but we will work with you to figure out how you can do that best in order to succeed.
So accountability. I think it's like you're right. Starting from day one, it's accountability, and then it's checkpoints, right? Like whether it's in your staff meeting or your team meeting, going through and talking about that, right? I think a lot of technologists come in with the view that it's recruiting's job to hire and they're supporting them. And I like to flip that on its head and be like, if you were the hiring manager, it literally has hiring in your title. It is your responsibility, and it's how you work with recruiting and other parts of the organization to make that happen.
We have a weekly engineering review that we do on our team, and this is an engineering review. We're looking at incidents we've had, response times, API errors, latency drops, and so forth. But hiring is a tab in that in the spreadsheet that we review, and it's done on a team-by-team basis. And so even if your team's doing great technically, we then get to that chart, and your team hasn't come close to their interview goals or their hiring goals, you're as accountable for that as you are for the production deployment.
I saw somebody write that they were implementing SLAs, so service level agreements are something that technologists know really well. So give them an SLA on like how quickly they need to respond to an interview request to schedule on their calendar, or how quickly they need to give feedback or something like that. And I was like, that's interesting. I might have to put that into my personal playbook.
That goes into candidate experience too.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are all good accountability measures. What role should the hiring manager play though? I feel like this is actually a thing I've seen, right? Where you ask a hiring manager to be more involved and take more ownership, but they don't know what activities they should be doing. Should they be going out and sourcing, sending LinkedIn messages, trying to grab coffees, speaking at events? What should they do?
It depends on the engineer, really, because not everyone, again, is going to be super great at hiring. So
enjoy it.
Or enjoy it. So you need that internal support. We have an internal recruiter team that can come in and train them and assist them. And again, it depends on the individual how much support goes into that.
Yeah.
And in which area, I think, right?
Absolutely.
So maybe somebody loves speaking at conferences, right? So maybe that's what they do, and they get more support, in the other areas. But I think what's important is to say the hiring manager makes the decision. They're accountable, right? I've gone back and forth working at different organizations where it wanted to be a democracy, and it was almost a vote. And I always say at the end of the day, the hiring manager needs to actually be the deciding vote, right? They don't just get one, just like everybody else is the interviewer, because at the end of the day, they're the one that's gonna have to coach them. If there are problems, they're gonna be the ones who are really like living with that. And so they need to, I always call it a feedback call instead of, for example, a decision call, because what it should be is the hiring manager is collecting that feedback. There's transparency and discussion and seeing all of that, so that the hiring, and most of the time it's obvious, but sometimes, it's not obvious.
So that was actually an answer to my next question. So my next question is around how you get to decisions. So what do? You've got a bunch of people who've gone through interviews. You have to make a decision about whether or not to hire somebody. So not just whether to advance them, hire them at the end. What does your process look like, and what are some of the trade-offs, and who should own the decision in the end?
So I think one kind of guiding principle is, and this kind of answers the previous and this question, is that the people on your team are part of the engineering system that you're managing. So you're managing software, you're managing architectural decisions, quality, and people. And what that means is that if you're thinking about who to hire on the team, in the same way the hiring manager also owns the software that team is building, they own the decisions around the people. At certain times, you build consensus. At certain times, you make a decision that doesn't have full consensus, but it's for the right of the team. And that's a tricky balance. At certain times, you depend on other resources. You depend on the input of others. So a technical decision, I might rely on product management more or less for one thing versus the other thing based on whether it's more kind of lower level in the stack or more of a higher level decision. It's the same on people. So that's kind of a guiding principle we use. And then with that guiding principle and the fact that the hiring manager really owns the introduction of people onto their team, I think there's a bunch of mechanics around how you run the debrief, how you collect feedback. It goes into, to me, a lot of the if you're thinking about the process from the debrief on, you really should be going upstream. So you should be focused on who's interviewing for what competencies are they looking for, because those will flow naturally into what type of feedback each individual is giving. But then afterwards, I think the decision really is the hiring manager. And much like technical decisions, there will be times when a hiring manager makes a decision that us as the CTOs don't agree with. And
do you empower them? You just say, this.
you trust
dig
but
your own grave.
verify. Well, and it's the same as a technical
I think you
decision,
challenge them
You
to
challenge, you
make sure their
verify.
thinking process.
You
right?
monitor, you retro when it doesn't go well, you do all the things you would do if they were making a technical decision, where if it was a massive decision, you would probably be a little bit more hands-on than if it were, look, you could do this or this, and I think you should do this, but if you're going to do that and own it, go for it.
Unhiring is not fun, right?
It's not fun, it's expensive, but so are, major technical decisions.
Yes, Blaga.
The only thing I'll add to that is making sure everyone on the interview team understands what we're hiring for. Because everyone might have an opinion, but have a different understanding of why we're bringing this person in and why we want them to be here. So being aligned on that is super critical.
So the two things I'll add is, one, I always do that through a kickoff call. If we're recruiting a new role, we have a kickoff call with everyone who will be involved in the interview process to talk through that, because I think that is really important. And I was going to say, and you have to make sure that everyone puts their feedback into their greenhouse scorecard.
They do.
So that, because sometimes,
quickly, right?
yeah, quickly, because
you forget
sometimes
things.
the feedback call doesn't happen for another week or so, and you want their, and you want their thoughts to be fresh and to be able to go back to them.
Awesome. And I had one more sort of follow-up question that's a bit more tactical, but you are about to make a hire, and you don't really have all the information you need to know whether you're actually going to hire that person. So you have enough information to say, this is someone that I want on my team. But then they might come back to the recruiter and say, I want X number of dollars, and it's 30% more than you have budget in your band, and you have to make some decisions about where to place them. How do you think about compensation and title and leveling? You have a great engineer that you want to join the team at the end of the process. Are you integrating that into the interview itself? In New York, of course, you can't ask certain types of questions up front. You have to get to the end and make a decision. Candidates often have a lot of competitive offers, so just laying a few of the facts out there. What do you guys think? How do you think about compensation?
I think it's about setting expectations, right? You have to set those expectations early because you don't want to waste the candidate's time and you don't want to waste your time. It's very expensive. So being as clear as you can be on what the scope of the role is, and making sure those expectations more or less match. And then, of course, in the end, you're going to take a more in-depth conversation into what that means, but trying to spearhead it very early on so nobody's time is wasted.
I always tie back to the competencies, which I think some organizations do competencies just as like we need to have this so we can show people. But if let's say you have 5 or 6 competencies, right, that you talk about, I always set it up so that the interviews touch on each one. So if you can get a rating for those people and where they are in those competencies, you can help level and say, okay, they're a senior engineer in all but one, but they're pretty close, so we're going to offer them at a maybe first or second quartile senior engineer, right? I think the hard calls are when it's really on that edge, because I've seen it done both ways. You make them, they think let's say they're not a senior engineer yet, but they think they are, and someone else is willing to give them the title. Mm-hmm. I think you have to stay true to your organizational standards. You can't give someone the title if they're not there yet. Not only because it's not fair to everyone else on your team who's earned it, but also like it's going to set them up for not having a very successful first year with your organization, because when it comes time to review and get feedback, they're not going to be meeting that bar. And I think it's hard. I see people sort of give in, and I think you have to do that a couple times and live through that pain to be willing to sort of stand strong and be like, nope, you're a senior engineer. This is the range. This is what we're comfortable with.
Sometimes the role is not even within senior or not. Sometimes it's within engineer or technical product manager, right? You can cross bands.
I think the 2 points I'll add. One is that I found it's so common that a 30% type of request is really a market signal, and it's a sign that we weren't staying ahead of the game in terms of assessing what the market is. And the tough thing at that point is, well, do you recalibrate all your brands immediately? And so you bring this person in and then you recalibrate. And it's very easy to say, well, we're not going to do this one, but we'll kick off a process to do some market analysis. And that's where I think, if you think about when do you move fast, when do you actually, go outside your comfort zone, stay up all night, contact people, try to, those are the moments to do it. You kind of never waste. To me, that's, going back to my analogy of hiring as part of the engineering system, that's kind of like a production outage to me, right? So it's like, oh crap, we have a senior engineer who's 30% above. Man, we're paying everyone else below. We got to solve this tonight. And you go and you work with everyone. You kind of figure it out. So I wouldn't, I've seen that pattern all too often. The other thing I'll say is the banding is often, especially in a place like New York, you have the banding and the salaries, but then you also have kind of the quality of the team and the quality of the company. And the challenge is there's like, no matter what you're offering, if you're joining a place like Greenhouse, as an engineer versus, there's going to be some other startup that's going to offer that same candidate a more fancier title or more comp. It's such a competitive environment. And so you've got to be honest with the candidate about that and do it in a humble way, but basically say, look, the opportunity we think we offer you is X dollars plus the ability to work with these engineers plus this and this. Some of that's financial, some of that's not financial. We think that's the whole package. We think you should diligence the whole package, which means come talk to our engineers again if you want to. But in the end of the day, that's what we have to offer you.
And this is where culture is key, right?
Yeah.
I think I've always said my goal is I don't want a candidate who's making a decision solely on comp, because I'm going to bet that that's going to lead to other issues, and like within 9 or 12 months they're going to leave because someone else is going to give them another 30%, right? I think what you should do is try and make it so that they don't walk away from you because of comp. If they love everything else about the opportunity and the organization, everything, that comp's not what makes them walk away.
Which I think goes back to the market signal point. There's another piece of this here, which is that because in the tech community we have vesting and we have cliffs and all this other stuff. I think I am personally biased towards making concessions in those cases. If I'm pulling someone away from a major vesting event and I need to give them another 100K to help bridge that gap, I'll do that as a separate bonus or whatever else. And I think it's been controversial, but I'm in favor of doing that kind of thing.
All right, great. So I do want to touch upon diversity hiring as well, which is top of mind for every tech leader. I don't think I've gone to a dinner with a bunch of CTOs without talking about diversity in my entire career. So it's top of mind. It's something that we're all working on. A couple of questions. So first, how do you guys think about creating diverse teams? There are so many different dimensions to diversity. What do you think the industry is doing well and not doing so well in trying to make things better or change the status quo?
I think that they're being very, because technology is a data-driven industry, I think they're being very data-driven about it. And what I've had to do is sort of step back with teams and be like, why? It's not just to hit metrics, right? And there's some really great articles out there that talk about why are diverse teams so great, right? They better understand the problem, they come up with a more comprehensive set of solutions, and they end up making the best decision. So first, I think you have to start with the value proposition of the diversity. And I think then that helps you highlight that it's not just demographics, it's also education and industry and company size, experience, and all of that plays in to the diversity. So I think the first step is that. Some of the other things that I think when I've worked with organizations is if you want to have a diverse pipeline, you've got to have diversity source recruiters. Like, there just aren't as many people out there, and they're probably getting bombarded, and they're not looking. They're less likely to be looking, right? Actually, as a minority, they tend to be a little less confident in their own abilities and skills, right? I think that's important. The other thing I think people miss is the retention. I've gone into organizations that are like super focused on like their pipeline of diversity, and I just said, do you realize the exact amount you're bringing in is leaking out the other side? Like, how about you work on stopping that so that as you bring more people in, it's not leaking out the other side, and dig into why is it leaking out the other side?
The commitment needs to come from the executive team, right? It's a business decision to commit to diversity, and they need to work to build that environment. So circling back to, it's not just about getting them in the door, it's about keeping them there and making sure that your diverse employees feel comfortable in the environment that you've built.
Yeah, I think diversity is really about inclusion. And so when you think about it as diversity and inclusion, where you land is that every team is diverse. So I've been on teams where I've come into an environment and demographically the team is not diverse at all. But one of the things that's helped us actually welcome new perspectives, new demographics into that team is focusing on, okay, given the team we have today, what are the diverse perspectives that we have and how do we make sure we're including them? Do we have people who come from a different professional background, who are a different, age, who worked at a failed company versus a successful company? And are we including all of those thoughts?
And leveraging them.
And leveraging them as competitive advantage. And if you're doing that, first of all, that's just a good business to do. But what that does is it then creates an environment where someone who is demographically diverse, who comes in to interview and is trying to figure out, I mean, part of what they're doing, frankly, is looking around at the population you have and saying, is this a place I feel like I belong? But the best you can do if you don't have that kind of outward demographic is to at least present yourself as a genuinely inclusive environment where any new perspective is seen as competitive advantage, not as something that a metric we're trying to hit.
And you have to really work at that.
Absolutely.
It's not something that happens naturally. You have to get in there and actively call out people for their opinions because not everyone is going to be super outspoken.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. We actually had a big reorganization at Compass yesterday. It's in the news, it's all public. And one of the articles that was written about it is that our CEO and our COO were locking horns. They used the words, they were locking horns, and so they had to reorganize to move this here and that there. And the funny thing is internally, we see that as competitive advantage. We were actually joking about it this morning about how the fact that they wrote about this, that's great, that's exactly what we want. And that our leadership being open about the fact that they disagree with each other, but in a constructive way, of course, has created an environment where the rest of our company feels like, if I have an opinion that's different than yours, I'm empowered to share it because look at them, they're doing the same thing, and that's created a very inclusive environment.
You've established the psychological safety to do that, and when the executive team sets that example, it opens it up for everyone.
So I think it's funny because you have two women up here, and this is not the normal percentage of women, especially at tech leadership level. But it's funny, I've had a lot of colleagues say to me, wow, you've gotten diversity, right? I've been able to get between 40 and 50% women on my technology teams. I've been able to have match sort of the US demographics and race and other things, right? And I say, my joke is, well, if I've survived in tech for over 20 years, there's got to be some reward at the end of this, right? Something had to have come easy. But I think it is rough enough out there that if you can really be a psychologically safe place and give everyone opportunity, right? And do that, it will get out there, right? It will get out there. I always say, my teams know that, there's none of that, right? And it's not just gender, it's any kind of, there's no acceptability for anything but inclusion. And I think as a leader, you set that tone. And as a strong leader, if you really set that tone, people talk to their friends. They talk to other people out there in the industry.
You build your reputation.
Yep, the minority candidates are going to be drawn to that because they're going to see that as a safe, supportive place.
But also diversity builds diversity, right?
Absolutely.
The more diversity you have on your team, the wider your network.
And the earlier you start.
Exactly. It's really hard to start from nowhere and add someone.
That's great. So I'm going to ask just one more question, and then I want to leave a little bit of time for audience questions. So we're going to ask one more. There are a couple of mics out there, so if you have questions for this panel, please feel free to start thinking about them and heading towards the mic. So the last question, if you can just think of a 20 or 30-second answer, if possible, for a deep question. What should we be measuring when we're doing diversity hiring? What are the right metrics to focus on when we're thinking about that? Easy question.
The couple things off the top of my head I would say is the pipeline. What is the percentages coming in and across, and then the percentages across the different stages of the pipeline, so that you can identify if there are problems in your process, right? Where are candidates, are you getting them in and then are they dropping off at certain stages, and how do you do that all the way through retention? So I think that's one of the things. I think the other thing would be, getting a candidate experience report back. Right, getting them to do a little NPS score so you can see, are our diverse candidates having the same experience or not having the same experience? That's some of the ones off the top of my head.
I'd have to very much agree with those. It's hard to disagree. And circling back to the interview process, it's also about retroing everything that's happening in your interview. You're as weak as your weakest link, so someone having a bad day can really impact and set things off, and that has ripples through reputation and your network and the culture you're building.
I'm going to object to the premise of the question.
Here we go.
20, 30 seconds, right?
Yes.
I think this is one of those topics where you obviously should be doing everything that was just said, but in the end of the day, it's not a metrics-driven exercise. It's this is the topic that you need to stay up all night, poring over all the qualitative feedback that you're getting, all of the, the feedback call with the candidate about what their experience was like, the employees and so forth. You're going to get lots of emails and phones and notes and so forth, and you need to involve your team in doing that so that everyone feels that they really understand all of the different, very nuanced situations that lead to a more diverse or less diverse environment.
I have one, not necessarily to do, but not to do, and this is a personal opinion, so feel free to disagree, but I find that people get uncomfortable when you call out how diverse we are, right? Being like, look, we've hired so many African Americans. Like, everyone just feels awkward when you say things like that, and then it feels not genuine, so please don't do that.
What do you think about having, like the one female engineering manager meet the female candidate? Is that a positive? I mean, serious question.
Absolutely positive.
Or negative?
Yeah, I've
so that's
received a lot
not
of
doing
feedback.
what you said in terms of.
It's
No,
not,
I
it's
think
not about
in the
calling
interview
it out.
process, I always say that they need to meet someone like them. Even if it's like, let's say you, at that location, you don't have a female engineer and you're interviewing someone, great. Then get a product manager or a designer or someone else.
Or even marketing.
To have a coffee, right? Or to do more of a culture interview or something like that. I think, as a woman, the number of times I have gone through an interview process and not seen another woman, it's changed. But early on, that was the standard. And I think just to see one person who was like me, would have gone a long way.
But I always get this feedback when interviewing female candidates. Oh, it's so great to see a female here. I want to understand what it's like for you. I want to understand the culture. I want to understand what you are doing to build the diversity, the gender diversity here.
Absolutely, and I know this could go on organically for another 2 hours, but we have just about 6 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we take some time to take audience questions.
There we go.
We have a couple of people lined up at the mic, so please go ahead and ask your question. Let us know who you're asking, if it's anyone in specific, and go for it.
Hi, my name's Julie Parks. I work for a web-based software company named WildBit, and it's a general question for all of you. So we have a large portion of our team are developers and engineers, and we're a primarily remote organization. And something we've experimented with through the pipeline of interviewing is we've occasionally done blind testing, like the test projects that come in will remove any identifying information and have it scored. And how do you feel specifically to the conversation of diversity and inclusion? Do you feel blind reviewing and scoring is helpful or defeats the purpose, possibly?
I think there's very few parts you can actually do that to. Writing code is actually one, right? But I think it's even language. I was running some review processes, and I had a woman who her review was like, she helped the team do this, and she always went above and beyond, right? Like all this language. And I had to stop the review process and ask the reviewer to go back and rewrite it. And I said, if that was a man, it would have been, he led this, right? He initiated this. And so I think it's, I think it's bias training across the board. I think if there are places where you can remove names, some of them are even removing universities because there's bias about, oh, you went to a great university or you went to a state school and that sort of stuff. So I think where you can, you should, but I think at the end of the day, you have to look at the whole picture and, to say, so I think it's more about education against biases than it is about making people blind.
Yeah, if you look at a blind resume, it's very easy to figure out if it's a man or a woman, even just looking at their activities or the things they like to do. So not always, but it can be figured out relatively
Yeah, it
easily.
says men's soccer club at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe they were busting rules. I played in a boys basketball league,
There you go. But probably a minority in that.
Always.
All right. I think
Same answer?
Agree with
okay, cool.
everything, yeah.
Thank
Let's
you.
move on to the next one. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name's Corey. I work at Starry Internet, and my question is more about finding the tech talent to begin with. There's so many companies looking for the same small pool of people, and your traditional sourcing methods, so LinkedIn or whatever it may be, might not be effective. So how do you get these people to apply in the first place? And have you done anything creative to attract, fresh talent?
Maybe we'll start with Satwik.
Yeah, we've been very intentional about sourcing from our.
Is your mic on?
Did I use it?
All right, Blaga? Just for a second.
I think it's a combination of things, right? There isn't this one magic thing that you can do and convince the diverse candidates. Or find them or bring them out. You have to network, you have to build your brand, you have to actively seek them out, you have to find the channels that are women only, or to substitute the pool, so the pool of candidates that you're looking at is equal and not biased to begin with.
And get active in the community, right? Like, who are you trying to recruit, right? Where is that community? So can you be hosting meetups or events or sponsoring conferences? Are you contributing in open source areas that folks of that genre are going to be consuming and say, oh wow, this company contributed this really cool service to this open source project. They're doing things like I want to do. So I think, there's that sort of general interest. And then lastly, of course, referrals.
Well,
referrals.
I'll add one last thing, which is I feel as leaders in technology, it's also our responsibility to mentor, right? So it's our responsibility to help pull people up. So
I think it's our number one job.
Exactly.
Always be.
All right, we're going to give Satwik the last question. And are you on a hot mic now?
I don't know. I think maybe if I just lean in.
All right. So we're going to end this with leaning in. All right.
Why don't we take the question and I'll.
Last question for Satwik.
Whatever it is, I'll have a great answer.
I hope so. First of all, thank you all for this. I work for a company called LiquidNet. My name is Tanya. We are a mid-sized fintech firm. So obviously, sort of for us, one of our biggest challenges have been finding candidates that align with our domain expertise requirements, particularly in the global trading technology team. And we're finding a lot of shrinkage among candidates who can really deliver the way that we need them to. And I think we have to be creative about considering other profiles that maybe don't have the domain expertise. So what I'd like to know, if you could maybe weigh in on what's a way to convince hiring managers who are very bullish against hiring people who don't have domain experience.
So I think there's a couple aspects to that. So one is really thinking about the scale that you need to hire. So do you need to hire 1 or 2 more people, or do you need to hire 10 to 20? If you need to hire a larger scale of people, then building a competency around the actual retraining or introducing the domain expertise to candidates who don't have it is just, that just becomes a business priority. You need to develop a boot camp. You probably, in New York especially, could partner with one of the organizations that runs things like coding boot camps and have them actually, come in and help you with developing that. And then that becomes, actually a pretty attractive thing for candidates to do who want to get into a new area.
All right. Officially at time. I have somebody.
Come talk to me afterwards. I had to recruit engineers who could build in 19 different industries at McKinsey, and I made that argument hard about why they just needed attitude and aptitude. So if you want to find me afterwards, I have all kinds of helpful information.
All right. Thank you so much. What a great panel. I really appreciate all of you guys coming in. Please, round of applause for everyone. All right, and we're out. Let's do it. All right, cool. Thank you.